Welcome to Roland's Travels. I'm your host, Roland Millward, and today we've got a very special interview for you. Stay tuned. Well, I'm very pleased to welcome our guest on the podcast. That's Jennifer Jenkins, author of a book called 3, which we're going to be talking about in this podcast. But first of all, we just first of all say hello to Jennifer. How are you?
Hello, thank you. I'm okay, thank you. I've been enjoying the sunshine.
And a lot of it we've had too, which is nice.
I know, very spoilt.
Excellent. Well, what we'd like to know, first of all, before we get into the book and about the history of the period, is tell our listeners a little bit about yourself and your background.
Okay. Well, I live in Warwickshire, near Rugby, in the village, and I'm married. I've got a husband and I've got 2 sons and a dog who I'm hoping we won't hear from this evening. My background is in education. I was a primary teacher and an assistant head teacher. I was responsible for English and RE, and I've sort of moved on from there into advisor work. So I'm currently responsible for all things religious education and spiritual development in the Coventry and Warwickshire area, really. So any queries from schools around those things, they typically end up in my inbox one way or another. But I did always want to be a writer. From when I was very small, I was making books and writing stories. Really enjoyed that aspect of teaching, working with books and introducing pupils to the joys of reading and how to become a writer themselves. And history was my other favourite topic to teach. So that's where I actually encountered the subject matter that became the book. And I was actually working for Coventry Cathedral, technically, when I wrote the book, because I wrote the book when I was on furlough. So I actually wrote the book during the first lockdown, and then went into the job that I'm in now, and the books out there, and I'm just enjoying sort of talking about it with people like yourself.
Good. Well, you had a great advantage then with the COVID lockdown for yourself. So that was very handy. Yeah,
I did, in terms of the subject matter and also the time. But my husband was joking, we can't afford to have another pandemic just so you can write another book, darling. So it's a once in a lifetime thing, I think.
Well, once you've sold the TV and film rights, you won't be worried. So the book 3, I loved it. I read it fairly quickly, really. I got stuck into it and I was reading it regularly. Really loved the storyline. It's about the Great Plague of Eyam. I call it Eyam. Right. Some people call it Eyam, but I think they like to call it Eyam in Derbyshire.
I think so, yeah.
And of course, 1665, 1666, it's a specific period in time. And you've centred your book on 3 women who were living at that time. 3 main characters. Remember them? Emmott Sydall. Emmett, I want to call her Emma, but it's Emmott Sydall. Yeah. Catherine Mompesson, Elizabeth Hancock. And of course, these are real people who lived at the time, aren't they? You've based your book on real lives, but obviously fictionalized the story. So why did you choose this as a storyline and these characters?
Okay. Well, as I sort of hinted at before, I kind of discovered the village's story when I was teaching. We were doing the Great Plague. We sort of looked at London, and then my own research showed me that there was also plague in this little village in Eyam, and they had this fascinating story, and that sort of triggered memories of learning about that myself when I was at school, at a time when your history lessons were on recorded TV programs. They wheeled in the big telly, and it was going to be a great day, and I remember vividly a history lesson with the boundary stone and and some children in period costume putting vinegar and leaving coins in there. So I started to think, I remember that from my childhood. That's quite interesting. I'll go to Eyam and I'll see what this is all about. Maybe get some resources, as all good teachers do, to go and do a recce and get all your bits and bobs together. And while I was there, I discovered the story of Emmett and Roland first, and it's a love story, essentially. And I was teaching Romeo and Juliet at the time, because that's another one of my passions. Shakespeare, been a lead teacher for the RSC at some points in my career, and I thought, oh, this is quite similar, you know, star-crossed lovers that doomed. So it was Emmott that I was really drawn to. Just imagining what would it be like to be a young girl sort of trapped in this village. You can't see your fiance. You've got this whole life ahead of you, and you know, really she captured my imagination. But I then went to visit the village a few more times. One of those things where, you know, you tell other people, oh, this was a great trip, and then they want to go. And so I went with my in-laws, and I found out a bit more about Catherine and Elizabeth on that trip. And I'd already kind of got this idea in my mind that I might like to write something about Emmett. I used to write a lot of poetry, so I think initially I was thinking, oh, this will become like a narrative poem. I actually wrote a short story about Emmett and Roland's love affair for a local literary magazine called Chatterbox. So it's a couple of pages. And I think it started to sort of grow from there, thinking, well, actually, all of these women have got something interesting to contribute to a wider understanding of this story. So I think it was sort of, I started to think, well, how can I tell their story? How can I tell 3 different women's stories without spoilers? So you couldn't tell them consecutively. You'd just be repeating yourself, and you'd know what was going to happen. And so I'd read a few books through book club that had sort of what I call woven narratives, where you'd got different perspectives going on in the same story, and you sort of had to keep track of them. And I started to wonder if that might work. It was actually a really frightening thing when I was putting the book together, because I wrote them separately. So I wrote Emmett, then I wrote Catherine, and then I wrote Elizabeth. And I didn't know, after all that work, all that 100,000 words, whether the weaving would actually work to create a narrative that made sense and was fathomable for the reader. So it was a little bit of an investment that may well have gone wrong in the end. But I think, why did I pick these women? Why them in particular? I think it's that idea of her story, redeeming the lost voices of history, a lot of which are women. I've just finished reading Femina by Dr. Janina Ramirez, which is all about women from the Middle Ages who we perhaps don't know about, and these are amazing women. And I think I felt that way about this story of Eyam. There's a lot of focus on William Mompesson and Thomas Stanley, the 2 reverends who, you know, they lead the village and they create the quarantine, and they sort of, they're there with people who are dying. They're helping them write their wills. They're rightly, you know, at the centre of the story. But I wanted to bring some of the women from the story into the sort of main stage, rather than being on the periphery. And I think I kind of capture that a little bit in the book. If you're happy for me to just read one quote.
Please do. Yeah.
At the end of the book, I have this sort of the women sort of memorialised by the men in the final chapters. And there's one bit where Joseph is talking, Joseph Hancock, so the eldest son of Elizabeth, and he says he's talking about what he wants to do to sort of make sure that his family are remembered, and he says, so that they would never be forgotten. So what she did would never be overlooked or erased from memory. And I think that captures what I was trying to do. So that story of Eyam that rightly lives on and on and on, and you know, it's captured so well in the Eyam Museum, that the lives of these women are also sort of memorialised and remembered, hopefully a little bit through my book. I remember when I finished just saying, you know, I hope that's okay for you, yeah. Emma, Catherine, Elizabeth, you know, that I've done you justice. And I think also partly, as I hinted at already, the fact that I was writing in a pandemic myself, really wanted to explore what was it like, what would it have been like for a woman, even in that time, to live through a plague so horrible and so sort of deadly, while still having to be wife and mother and look after your neighbours and think about your sort of your future in that way. So I think, yeah, a combination of personal fascination, but also wanting to kind of capture a story that perhaps hadn't focused so much on the women up until recent retellings.
Yeah, well, say I love the whole storyline, the way you did that. I'm not going to give any spoiler alerts for anyone who hasn't read the book yet. We're not going to say how it all ends.
Have to be very careful with how we talk about it.
Yeah, I think one of the things about history is quite often it's taught as a surface fact.
Yeah.
So many hundreds of people died. The vicar did this, the vicar did that, da, 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 da. But what did people do every day?
Yes.
How did they live through this, which is where you've tackled it from, which humanizes what would be otherwise cold facts, really.
Yes, and I think I didn't find this to read out this evening, but there's a line about how people kind of got through it by doing what they always did, for doing the things they knew how to do, and that was that whole one day at a time. You do what you know to do type of idea kind of woven through. So you do get a glimpse, I hope, into what village life would have been like and the kind of things that they would have spent their time doing.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure you certainly do. I did as I read through it, and I'm sure anyone else would do the same. So I certainly highly recommend just reading the book from that perspective, of understanding a time period in what essentially is quite a remote village. It's still out of the way a little bit these days, isn't it? You need a car and things.
It is, yeah.
It's a lovely place. Anybody wants to go, please do visit Eyam, because it is a beautiful area and quite unspoilt, really. It's not been commercialized as perhaps they could have done.
No, I think they've done a really good job of preserving the village, whilst maintaining that story and acting as story holder. It's a bit of a balance, isn't it, to do that?
Yeah. In fact, I heard the last time I went was last year. I videoed it for YouTube, practicing with a new camera, actually, so it's not the best video, but it was just something. Video. So you like it, good. But there's a chap walking up the road moaning to his wife, "Oh, there's nothing here to see." I'm thinking, what have you come for? Amusement arcades or what?
Yeah, you've got to know what you're looking for, haven't you? Yes,
absolutely. Well, you go for the history and the beautiful buildings and who lived in them, and that's we don't want any more gift shops or anything like that. No. What is there is absolutely fine. It's great,
Absolutely.
So thinking about the story, then, how did you go about researching it and getting all the information, apart from just reading the notice boards outside the homes that you see in that theme?
Oh yeah, the green signs. Yeah. So as I said, there was about 10 years of sort of being fascinated, and I think I did 2 or 3 visits in that time, and then really thought, if I'm ever going to write a book about this, I'm going to have to do a bit more than going to the village and reading the green signs and going into the museum itself. So I did about a year and a half's active research. I did some extra visits with the purpose of taking photographs, walking different routes, really trying to understand the geography of the village and where different homes were located, sort of. For example, when in some of the Emmott chapters, I talk about how she's looking across at the plague cottages and imagining death coming across the road. And so sort of trying to understand where my characters were in terms of each other, and how the village was laid out. So I had maps and everything, but I wanted to kind of, walk those roads and those streets and understand how the village would have functioned back then. And then I just read everything I could find on Eyam and the plague. It's one of my hobbies now to just put Eyam in, see where I come up on Amazon. If you put Eyam in, John Clifford is the historian for the village. He passed away a few years back, but he's left some brilliant books on Eyam, and his wife Fran actually read my novel at the request of the museum retail manager, just part of their policy to just make sure all the volunteers read the self-published literature, just to make sure that as I said, that story keeping has the integrity that they would want it to have. So that was a bit of a nerve-wracking few weeks, because I was quite confident. I'd done a lot of research, but it was still really a bit nerve-wracking having Fran read it. But she said she felt it was well researched. So so I did use quite a lot of documents from the museum website. They've actually got some in their sort of resource area. I think they're probably intended for schools, but they were actually really helpful to me. So on my website, which I'll give to you before we go, you can see some pictures of me with all my photos out of my maps and the documents. So one of the most important things I had was the list of deaths, so I could see who died when, and also the population lists. There's a whole sort of document that tells you who was living in the village at that time, when they were born, when they died, where they lived, their families. So that was really helpful because I wanted to create friendships and relationships in the village. And whilst a lot of people wouldn't ever know if I'd paired up an 80-year-old with a 20-year-old, as a writer, I wanted to have integrity in that and really look for people who could have, been neighbours or could have been in a peer group. So that was quite a useful thing for me. But I also went beyond that. I was reading things like epidemiological reports about Eyam and how they think the plague spread around the village. So beginning with rats, spreading it across the cottages, and then eventually into human-to-human contact. So that kind of helped me as we get further into the narrative, who's going to be infecting who and in what scenarios might that happen, and how are they going to be trying to protect themselves from that. So what I essentially ended up with was this timeline of sort of known facts. So I had big chart, 3 rows with the 3 women, and then columns for each month from the start till the end of the epidemic. And on there I'd sort of listed everything that is known from the historical record, and that's in terms of written records, but also the sort of oral legends around Eyam, and that they're hard to verify. Some of the things, did they really happen that way, or has that sort of become a bit of a legend rather than completely accurate? But it's all part of the sort of known narrative, so I've included that into my own narrative. And so that sort of was like the bones, so what we know. But then that wasn't going to create a novel. You could put probably like 1 index card of facts about each woman. So then I had to start thinking about what could have happened, and that's where some of the deeper research on life, what life might have been like at that time, the kind of things that people would have been doing, especially women's roles and how they would live. So I sort of described that as putting flesh on the bones. So we've got our bare bones of history, and then the creative imaginings, I think I call it at some point. Maybe it's in the blurb, I can't remember where I've written that, but that this is possible, it's plausible that this could happen. And some of it is puzzling out the sort of the path that the plague takes in the village. So in particular with Emmett, hopefully it's not a spoiler to say that she loses quite a few family members early on. You'll find that in the first few chapters of the book, a very sad and moving part, right, that you're thrown into early on, but she doesn't join them. So there's you start straight away thinking, well, that's really weird. She's living in the house with all these people. Why wasn't she sort of joining them in their demise? So throughout, when you look at the history of the village, there are certain things that you think that's really interesting, and that's one of the most fascinating bits of the museum for me. I think there's one part where you've got the whole of the village mapped by households, and you've got colour coding for who got it and died, who got it and survived, and who never got it. And that's just really, really interesting. And I think you can probably see parallels in our times. We all know people who've managed somehow to get to this point and not had COVID yet. So yes.
I've not had it yet. No, hanging in there.
3 times and got long COVID. So we're on opposite ends of the spectrum. But so some of it was like, me posing questions and then trying to answer them through my research. And then when that was impossible, just, coming up with something creative and plausible. And then one of the things that I struggle with in terms of being a writer is how to stop the research. I'm like a total rabbit going down a rabbit hole. So I was finding myself, making notes on geology and things like that, Roman settlements and things like that weren't really pertinent to the story. But in some ways, it helped me feel that I knew that. And I do touch on things at some point. Like there's one bit where Elizabeth sort of comments on the caverns beneath her feet. Mm-hmm. It's not relevant to the plague story, but it's sort of, there's an idea that I I hope that all of that in-depth research, like the hinterland of the main story, kind of enriches it in some way. So there's a heck of a lot of research. There's 2 notebooks full. I've got index cards with it all numbered so I could find things, and lots of documents. But basically, that intensive 1.5 years I completed in February 2020, and then we all know what happened in March 2020. And then by April, I was furloughed from my job at Coventry Cathedral, and the universe kind of presented me with the space that I needed to start writing. So I thought, if I don't start now, I'll never write this book. So that's what. No,
that's brilliant, excellent, and that's a good summary of that. Thank you ever so much for that, Jennifer. Obviously, with all that kind of research, you have to draw a line somewhere, because I'm a terror if I look a word up, and before dictionaries disappeared and we just Googled it, but I would open the dictionary, oh, that's interesting, and then forget what word I was supposed to be looking at.
I think if you like words, that's really easy to do, isn't it?
Yeah. and encyclopedias are the same sort of thing. So you have to be very disciplined. You've done that. That's great, and you produced the book. So that's your first one then, isn't it? If you like, under your belt.
Yeah, my debut. Yeah.
Got to get out there. And everybody wants a copy. I will put in the link to the show notes on the podcast and on my rolandmillward.com page a link so that people can come to your website. They can purchase the book through your website via the Amazon link that you've got. Yeah. That'll be in there. If anybody just can't see any links at the moment, it is Jen Jenkins 3. That's THREE.com, jenjenkins3.com, where they can come to your website. I do also like the fact you've produced maps that people can actually look where the 3 ladies were, where they walked, where people lived, and so on.
You can download that from the website. You sort of on the homepage scroll down and you'll find them. I think you can choose which woman you want to follow, or you can just do all 3. My husband produced those maps for me, as well as the cover for the book. So we've been a bit of a team on this one.
Well, it'll be your agent getting 20%, so be careful. Excellent. And also you're on Twitter, so that's Jen Jenkins Writer. Yes. So if anybody would like to follow you on Twitter, and again, we'll put some links in there so people can find you on there. So when are you planning to get the next book out? Obviously, furlough is probably not going to come along again. So
no, well, that's the $1 million question. And as I said, I've got long COVID at the minute, so I have good days and not so good days. But one of the knock-on effects is that I can't do much reading and writing in the evenings, because that's when I used to do my research. But when I've worked my day of work, I tend to then, that's my cognitive capacity used up, and my physiotherapist has been quite strict with me on not pushing myself. So I have plot and I have characters. I've even got a title, but it's all sort of on pause at the moment. But I can tell you it's going to be set in the village where I live, and it spans about 1,000 years. So not doing things by halves. Sort of from the Doomsday Book, because the village is in the Doomsday Book, up sort of into sort of present and future time, and it's called The Web, and it's about 5 women. They're not real this time; they're fictionalized, but the time periods and the sort of the people and the events they're interacting with are real. So it's a bit of a switch from 3 in terms of that, but they're all connected by a Viking amulet that's called the Web of Weird, which is a symbol of past, present, and future. And that's all I can tell you, because there'll be too many.
Well, hang on there then. Well, if it took you about how long it took you to do research for just 2 years, 1665, 1666, this could be a long process of research. So you may have to be disciplined on the amount you do.
For sure, but I have actually done quite a lot of research before I got COVID. So it's all waiting there, and I've kind of had to kind of let that go a little bit for now, because I am desperate to give them their voices and get them onto the page. But I am going to get to it. Just going to take me a little bit longer than I'd hoped. But I've already instructed the husband on what I want for the cover. So he knows what we're doing. And,
he can work on it. Good.
There is on my website there is a page that talks about the new book and sort of some of my things I've come across already, So yeah, there's quite a lot of blog posts. I talk about my experience of the lot of long COVID, as well as quite a lot of reflections on 3 and writing that. So yeah, hopefully it's an engaging space for people who've read 3, and there's some book club questions on there as well if people are reading the book as a group. And as you said, the map is on there too. So
excellent. Well, I'm sure they'll all come flocking after they listen to this, Jennifer. They'll be on jenjenkins3.com. Don't remember, you have to spell it. It's not the digit 3. It's jenjenkins3.com. And the links will be on paper, as it were, on screen through my website and through the podcast notes where we can see them. Well, I want to thank you ever so much. It's been great to have a chat with you about the book.
Thank you.
And, I hope many more people will read it. The bookshops will stock it. And we can get it out in the hands of the people, which would be nice.
Thank you. That would be wonderful. But I've been blown away by the responses and the reviews already, because I didn't really set out to become like a world famous author or anything. I just wanted to tell this story. It just grasped me and fascinated me, and I'm just really happy that other people are moved by it and that they've connected with it. So thanks for your support with getting it out there. Really,
it's a pleasure. Thank you ever so much, and I'm sure we'll speak to you again very soon.
You will. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Roland's Travels. I appreciate you being here. Please do subscribe to Roland's Travels. You can do that through the podcast and obviously on rolandmillward.com as well. We'd look forward to welcoming you as a free subscriber. So take care, and we'll see you soon.